morning, everyone. Thank you for being here and sharing your time for listening to my talk. This is me. It was August 2014, and I was performing within an artist residency with artist Taxi Plasm. Together, we had created a work piece of art called Tell Me Your Secrets. And the idea was to create a safe space for people to share secrets. So for doing so, we created 2 sculptures that consisted of light programming, sonic algorithmic, live streaming, video capturing, lots of sensor inside, with all the main scope of listening, capturing, understanding, internalizing, and then reacting and performing. 2 months later, BMW reached out to me and asked me to join the company. So, which I did. I don't think they had seen the pictures of myself before, but they had seen certainly my CV, and beside being a musician and composer, I'm also an electronic engineer, and I have a PhD in room acoustics and psychoacoustics. And so that's how I joined the company at the beginning. But from the very start, I looked at this object not as a car, not as a vehicle. To me, this is a highly complex performative art installation. And this is the entity for which I wanted to create something. At the same time, I always like to look at the human element within things. And by the time I've been at BMW so far, I've seen how many hundreds, thousands of people are behind this car. So much energy put together from people. And sound as also to celebrate this. And ultimately, one of my vision is to turn every driver into a performer. So that the car, basically, it's the instrument through which they can express themselves. So I began working on the product, as it is called, but I realized pretty much soon that in order to achieve such a transformation, actually most of the time had to be involved to work on the organization per se, the way it sees not only my role, but the topic of sound, and at the same time to work on the mindset. So I had to be clear on to define the world, to illustrate the world I wanted to see, I wanted to live in, and I wanted people to live in. So one of the first challenges that belongs to my responsibility, I'm creative director for sound, is to define the sonic aesthetics of our fleet. And you know that electric vehicles do not produce a sound, which is considered to be dangerous. That's the reason why there are legal requirements around the world that prescribe the presence of a sound for electric vehicles. In these terms, sound is information, because it tells people there is an object moving around. But sound is much more. Sound is emotions. Sound talks to us. It caresses us. It can change the way we perceive and see things. And so that's the reason why I wanted to treat sound in a much different way. And also, the electric mobility brings a new paradigm. The way the energy is created is different. And so the way the sound is created must be different. Not only in terms of content, but the way we approach it compositionally. So for this reason, I created or I defined a philosophy that I called sound genetics. And it's a process, a framework that I defined to get to a very conceptual state up to a final sound. And it consists of 3 steps. The first is what I call the definition of the sonic organism, which is the definition of some properties that then turns into a cluster of variations, and ultimately they turns into sound. I've given a TED talk about this, so maybe I'm not going to deep dive into this, but if you are interested, please feel free to watch it online. And the very first vehicle that had the sounds that I've created based on sound genetics was the 7 series, which came in the street last year. It was in March. So one of the idea that I had also for the sound, the way I wanted to act with people, is that the sound basically was announcing something special approaching. So you think that you have your eyes closed and you feel first the sound, and then you turn and see the car. The sound has to announce what happens. And in this case, I wanted the sound to be some sort of an aura that is announcing something almost sacred that elevates it. And then I'm going to play for you now a short sound sample, how the car sounds like when it's turned on. And now I'm going to play a sample how the sounds evolve when the car is accelerating. So the overall volume is, of course, much quieter than this. Of course, we're coming back. The sound has been described in many different ways, but the one that I like the most, someone wrote or said that it seems like a choir of angels, which I like it for two reasons. The one, it's the idea that there is something human related to a machine. And the other one is the fact that it's announcing something special. I'm responsible also for Mini, and Mini it's a totally different kind of car. It's a different brand. It talks about different stories. So I had also the privilege to compose the sound for the very first Mini Electric, which hit the streets this year in April. And for Mini, I had a different approach. I talked a lot with design colleagues, which I do anyway. And there were two elements that captured my attention in particular. There was this design from the rims and also from the dashboard. So what I did, I basically extracted them in a very minimalistic and conceptual way. And I saw in this yellow circle and these hemispheres and in these other segments nothing else than a sound source that was interacting with surfaces. So my idea was to create a parallel between light fields and acoustic fields. So I defined 3 different ways the light interacts with people. You can have diffuse light, as you can see here, where you don't see the source. You can have another use case in which you see the reflected source of the light. And then you have a last example in which you see the light directly. And you can create an acoustic analogy between these light fields and the acoustic fields. You have a diffuse sound field, you have a reflective sound field, or you have a direct sound field. And for each of these elements, I created 3 different sound worlds. And then we had a lot of conversation with the marketing department, with the design department, with the board, because Mini is about something that is energetic, passionate, inventive, but at the same time it has also something to do with craftsmanship. It has to be friendly. It has to bring a twist also on the street. So I have a short sample of the sound that we ended up choosing for the car. It's always difficult to have you judge or perceive the sound if you are not driving. Because one of the essential things in composing the sound for the car, it's all about the interaction that you have with the car. This is why I like to talk about the driver as the performer. And I have this vision of turning everyone into a performer and ultimately a composer. And the last project that I would like you to mention, to talk about briefly, is this car called the Vision M Next, which we presented last year. And I had the privilege to work on the sound for this car with Hans Zimmer. Now, Hans, I don't think needs any introduction, one of the biggest living sound composer for film. And he became, since last year, the curator of BMW. What happened is that I spent lots of time with Hans in Los Angeles and in London in studios. And the first step is always to go to him and bringing a very conceptual idea that tries to capture the messages that the brand and the design are trying to convey. And in this case, I also refer to the light, because art is one of the major inspiration for my work. And I brought on the table a work of James Turrell. Now, if you haven't heard about James Turrell, or if you haven't seen any work of him, I strongly suggest you to do so. James Turrell works with light and use light as a mean to give us the consciousness of what does it mean to see. So it's mostly about our perception. And so we try to use also the same analogy within the acoustic environment. So what can we do to give the feeling to the people? What does it mean to listen? And this car is very sporty kind of car. So we had this moment which was called the boost moment, where you are triggering a button and then you get extra energy. And so the idea was to define the way the sound develops in time. So we had defined 3 main keywords, which were propulsive, morphing, and elevating. And the idea of morphing was that we created 4 different sonic rooms, for which you see the keywords: intention, devotion, grit, and resolution. And so the idea was that by moving from one speed to another, to another, to another, the sound was morphing into different sonic rooms, so that the driver could decide himself where he wanted to be. And that's, the step in the direction of having him being the composer. He can decide in which emotional state he's feeling and what he can deliver. I have now an example on how this car sounds like. There will be so much more to say, but I think my time is over. And I just want to conclude saying that it is important for us to give a different meaning of what sound it means within the electric mobility. It's a new opportunity, it's a new chance for us, but ultimately sound, it's a unique example of what does it mean to transfer, to communicate emotion from one soul to another. And this is also what electric mobility allows us to do for the future. Thank you so much.